we're not quite sure exactly when it started, because pubs and inns in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, many of them were brewing their own ale. They would often have a little brew house attached to them. And certainly we know in Cobham that there was a man called Joseph Stedman who owned a number of pubs and who did start developing the brewing of ale for those pubs. But then, as time went on and we came into the Victorian period, there was more demand and it became more industrialised. So this is when, the things started to develop. And Stedman acquired some property in Street Cobham, and he there's built the embryonic, first Cobham Brewery. Cobham, I think, was always, as indeed now, is always sort of deemed to be a slightly affluent area. In the 19th century, certainly, there were really two Cobhams. One was Church Cobham, which developed around the parish church, and the people who lived in that part of Cobham were generally sort of agricultural workers or attached to the big house. Whereas Street Cobham, at the other end, developed around the old Portsmouth Road, which was a very busy road, taking traffic from London down to Portsmouth and out to Exeter into the West Country. And because of all the traffic that developed along that road, Street Cobham became a place for pubs, inns, blacksmiths, ostlers, anything to do with travel. And that's why quite a few of the pubs in Cobham developed along the old Portsmouth Road. In about 1805, when this man called Stedman came along, and he purchased a property with some land from a man called John Mackay, and it was that which was then developed into a brewery of some sort. Stedman, when he died, the business passed to his daughter, Mary, and she married a man called Ashby. It was Ashby who really started to develop this as a big commercial enterprise. So that's really how it grew in the 19th century. Certainly Ashby took it out of being this sort of small localised malt house and brewing concern. He built large buildings which have all disappeared, sadly. We've got one or two photographs. We have the sales details of when the brewery was eventually sold off in the 1920s and finally demolished. So we have a couple of photographs and we have plans. It really was quite a substantial building, and I think it would have made quite an impact on the locality. I remember talking to an elderly lady in Downside, and she had worked at the brewery as a bottle washer. And there are one or two photographs of these bottle washers. But I remember that she said how the brewery became probably the largest employer in the area, and apparently it had like a steam whistle, to sort of clocking on and clocking off time, and that could be heard throughout Cobham Village. So it almost became like the chimes of Big Ben for Cobham.
Yeah.
This brings in this famous story of the visiting nonconformist minister who came to Cobham and described the place as being drenched in drink and wickedness. This is in the 1860s. Probably an overstatement. But in fact, at that time, the brewery had really taken off. But not only that, there were these pubs which had grown up in Cobham, around the street Cobham. And I think we had, at one stage, 15, 16 pubs or ale houses of some sort. in Cobham, places like the Tartar Inn, the White Lion, the King's Arms, the Royal Oak, the Plough, Little White Lion, the Running Mare, the Bear, the Crown, the Black Swan, the Antelope, the Harrow. It goes on and on. So we had a large number of pubs and this big brewery, and this is presumably why this nonconformist minister made the statement that he did, because drink was clearly then a problem. But then that's where local people met. There was nothing else for them to do, so they'd meet at the pub. Well, by all accounts, perhaps have too much tipple and get drunk. It seems to have flourished, even up to when it stopped. I think what happened was the brewery was eventually taken over by Watney, Coombe and Reed, the big brewers. So these smaller brewers possibly were struggling on their own, and the big brewing companies of the day, like Watney's or Watney, Coombe and Reed, they stepped in and started buying up smaller breweries, and that's exactly what happened at Cobham. So Watney, Coombe and Reed took it over. There was a small off-licence developed next door to it called Henneke's, but they gradually started to run it down, and then eventually it was Watney's who closed the brewery in the 1920s. I think they probably felt, because they had this very large brewery in London and we were close to London, they wanted to take everything back into London itself, and it wasn't really economically viable to be running a lot of smaller breweries. I found a deed which referred to this property. It said that the cottage or tenement with the malt house, brew house, yard and garden belonging. And I suddenly thought, hang on, what is this malt house and brew house? I knew nothing about this in Cobham. So that triggered, I wasn't really looking for the history of the brewery, that triggered my interest in finding out where the brewery was. And that research was one of my first publications, which I have here in front of me. I wrote an article or a short piece for the Esher District Local History Society, which still exists, and I'm the president of that. But as I say, that was back in 1972, a long time ago. And then that research was then published as this little book, Cobham Brewery. And then later on, I expanded all this into another book called Well Furnished with Inns. This was a phrase picked up from the 18th century description of Cobham. It was well furnished with inns. In fact, we had a lot of inns, as I said. So, and that, the interest in the brewery then made me look at pubs, because there were a lot of pubs around in Cobham, and I began to research their individual history. And as I went along, I began to pick up bits and pieces that were attached to the brewery or to the pubs. The flagons, which are on display in the library, I think they were given to me by somebody who'd worked at the brewery, and then I picked up pewter tankards from Cobham pubs on eBay, the internet or whatever, and various documents like the sales particulars when the brewery was sold. So it's really, over the years, I just sort of keep my eye out for whatever is coming up, and either it's things are given to me or I acquire them. I think most of my work, well, the starting place has always got to be the County Record Office at Woking, the Surrey Record Office. That's really key, because it's the place where it contains thousands of local deeds, documents, papers relating to the history of Surrey. I give a plug for that because I'm chairman of the Surrey History Trust, which helps to support the Surrey History Centre. But that's where I went initially to see what was there, by searching through catalogues. And I do remember now, as we talk, going up to the offices of Watney, Coombe and Reed in London, and seeing some papers up there. And then just generally, because when I started this, I said it was a long time ago, there were elderly people around who could remember the brewery. Just finding out who they were and making a point of going and talking to them and transcribing some of their thoughts about the brewery. I was contacted by a lady in Thames Ditton who in her garden had found the metal rim from a barrel which the bung would have gone into, and it was marked Cobham Brewery.
Oh yeah,
and
wow.
that was turned up in Thames Ditton. So little artefacts have turned up like that, which have then helped me try and build the bigger picture. You find bits and pieces here and there, you write it down, you copy it, it goes in a file, and then suddenly you get something else. And over the years, you think you've got enough pieces of the jigsaw to put them together, but very seldom is it sort of happen, as it were, overnight. It's always that's why, as historians, it's important to try and keep as much as we can, because eventually we can pull them together, perhaps to give a bigger picture of something. It was one of the, if not the biggest employer of people in Cobham, so it's providing a large employment for a large number of people. I don't know exactly how many, but it worked from the coopers making barrels, the people actually doing the brewing, the ladies who did the bottle washing. There was nothing else like that in Cobham at this time, right up to the 1920s. Cobham's never had any real industry apart from a place on the Cobham Tilt where they were making parts for aircraft during the Second World War. So I think the biggest impact was the fact that it just provided employment for so many people. And of course the pubs, I suppose the pubs were places where people would go and meet and talk. Okay, nowadays we have coffee shops, don't we? Not quite the same, but there's a lovely description of a man called Arthur Munby, who ended up spending a night at the White Lion in Cobham in the 1860s. And he says that this is 1861, and he's booked into the White Lion on Street Cobham. He said, I came to the White Lion at dusk, had an excellent meal, with an upper room looking down the broad village street, where groups were lounging in the pleasant idleness that ends the week's work. After tea I came down into the bar, where a little group of gossips soon formed. There was the shoemaker and the builder, and one or two young farmers, and a twinkling old party who had means of his own. We all sat round and smoked and talked of the old coaching days, when the White Lion, then twice as big, kept 40 horse, and 27 coaches passed to Portsmouth every day, and the shoemaker, who was then an ostler, saved £30 in his first year. There was also talk of one Richard Dew living near, a jovial man who gives his friends to drink strong cider and ale, then chuckles to see them stagger, and of tramps and paupers too. What a number of tickets for food and lodging the Cobham peeler had to give away per night, and so on. It's just, that for me just really evokes a picture of village community life here in Cobham in an era which is gone, lost forever. Yeah.